Hey guys, I give up on property investing. Seriously, there are so many reasons not to invest in Australian property. This episode, I'm going to be going through a bunch of these. I put this question out in my Facebook group, 70,000 people there. Whole bunch of people, 170 people replied as to why they would not invest in property. And to be honest, some of them are pretty good. Some of them are really rational. So in this episode, I'm going to go through why you shouldn't invest in property, why you should give up now even before starting. And I will also give you my perspective on those reasons so that you can make a logical decision. Make sure to share this because I know there'll be a lot of people in your friends, family, colleague circle who are fully against property investing. I want them to hear this one. And I also want your subconscious mind to hear this one because you'll also be telling yourself the story property investing is done, it no longer works, yield is too low, market's going to crash, the economy is doing really bad. This episode will hopefully also agree with those things and give you a fresh perspective as to why I too may give up on property investing. But stick till the end because that's where you find the real gold.
Welcome to the Oz Property Investment Mastery Podcast. My name's PK and I help busy people build passive income by buying top 5% growth and cash flow property and build a portfolio using data without wasting months doing research, spending weekends at inspection or catching flights, or dropping $10,000 to $20,000 on buyer's agents every single time. So if you're confused, lack confidence, and just overwhelmed with all the information and marketing misinformation available online and don't know where to start, then this show is for you.
So the first reason why people decide to give up on property is they think, well, there are other asset classes that can perform just as well, and they're just lower headache, like less stress, no tenants, no maintenance. I'm going to go through these rapid fire, right? But one asset class they say is Australian stock market. And I actually have nothing against Australian stock market. They think that I could invest in that instead and do just as well, if not better, in an easier way than property. Well, that's true in a way. Traditionally, over the last 90 years, Australian stock market has performed just as well, exactly the same as Australian housing market. But the question I have for people who are wondering that is, well, are you willing to leverage up the Australian stock market? Are you willing to put $100,000, $500,000 leveraged at 80% debt into this ASX? If you do that, you will then get better returns than the Australian property market because property is leveraged, right? But if you only put in $50,000, $100,000, $200,000 into the stock market, Australian ASX, you're not going to catch up to someone who's bought a $500,000 property with the same $100,000 because they are leveraged. So ask yourself, am I willing to build a multi-million dollar portfolio in the ASX with 80% LVR? If you had that kind of risk appetite, you might want to consider doing it. You'll do really well, maybe, or you could lose a whole lot. And that's the thing. A lot of people just don't have that risk appetite in stocks, but in property, they're willing to take that debt. You might say, what about the NASDAQ? What about Dow Jones? That's performed even better than the ASX, and that's true. But right now, what I tell myself is that PE, price earnings multiples, are hovering around 23 times earnings for the S&P 500. So that is a very elevated level. Is that going to go even higher, or is the downside risk more? That's the risk. And also, people are talking about a new super cycle for commodities. When commodities enter into a new super cycle, the Australian dollar does really well because we have a lot of those commodities under our earth. So Australia becomes more valuable, Australian currency becomes more valuable. And when that happens, Australian dollar goes up. So if you buy into NASDAQ, Dow Jones right now, and sure, you beat the Australian stock market, once again, got to be leveraged, right, to really compete with the property market. If that's the case, and then when you convert it back into Australian dollars and the Australian dollar has risen 20%, 30%, have you actually made as much money as you think? Now, I'm not giving you that this is right or wrong, but these are things to consider. Number two, reason why you should give up on property investing. People say that there's no way a suburb like Armadale, let's say in Perth, should hit $1 million. Right now, some properties are selling for $1 million. They say that if that's the case, that it is hitting $1 million, then there's no way it can keep rising. And that intuitively makes sense. But remember, that's what our parents said 20, 30, 40 years ago. There's no way Sydney house prices can reach $200,000 back when they were 18,000. Then 10 years ago, there's no way Australian housing median can ever reach $1 million. And then even 2 years ago, there's no way the Brisbane housing market can reach $1 million, it always keeps expanding. And the reason for that is not because the average person can afford it, it's because of more and more currency debasement and money printing. So when you have more money in the system, those who know how to trap it, typically the top 20%, they become wealthier, and that increased pool of money allows them to buy more and more assets. That at the core is what keeps driving house prices, despite every single decade people thinking, it's so expensive, how on earth can it keep rising? Number three reason why you should give up on property investing, Bitcoin. Yeah, there are some people out there, very intelligent people, more so than me, that say Bitcoin's going to reach $1 million, it's going to reach $2 million one day, $3 million, great time to buy now. I really have no idea whether it's a good time to buy now or not, but what the data suggests is that the exponential curve for an asset like Bitcoin performs the best at the start when, let's say, it's worth $1 and it becomes $100. That's 100x. It goes from $100 to, let's say, $10,000. Okay, that's a huge return on investment. For it to go from $100,000 per Bitcoin, which give or take it's at right now, to $10 million, that requires so much more force, so much more torque, so much more acceleration that you start experiencing the law of diminishing return. Sure, it probably will go up in the long term, right? But is it going to go up at the same rate? Don't make future decisions based on a new asset type that performed really well in the last 10 or 15 years. The next 10 or 15 years may be the complete opposite. Number four reason to give up on property investing, people say that the regulatory environment, the government, for example, in Victoria, are just going to make it more and more difficult for landlords. New tenant legislation where landlords need to pay more to keep their house in good order, which in my mind is a good thing anyway. More and more land tax. Land tax already went up in Victoria. It was proposed to go up in Queensland. It didn't happen. But as affordability gets worse and worse, which it's been doing for the last 30, 40 years, more and more new voters, young voters who typically lean left, are going to hate on property investors, which means the governments of the future are going to clamp down and make life more and more difficult, more and more expensive for property investors. And therefore, it's going to be really hard to replicate the type of returns that people have experienced in the last 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years as property investors. My perspective on this, I think there's an element of truth in that. But always remember, land is valuable. And why is it valuable? It's because they don't make more of it. It's always going to be scarce. So if you can somehow, there's a phrase, beg, borrow, or steal. I don't recommend breaking the law or anything, but so to speak, beg, borrow, and steal as much land as possible, then when you're older, you're going to have more wealth. When you pass that on to your kids, they're going to have some tangible assets that will be rising in value because land is scarce. Even a future voting base doesn't like property investors and they do everything they can for the government to clamp down on them. Still, they're going to need to put a roof over their head. Still, they're going to need premises to operate businesses from. Still, they're going to need to live. Everything like that requires land, and that land will become more and more scarce as the population continues to rise. There will always be an elite class and there will always be a poor class. The poor class will always try to bring the elite class down. Now, I don't want to be seeming to be part of the bourgeoisie or anything like that. Always remember, the elite class in all generations and all civilizations have been landowners, and that's always been the case. Become a landowner and be on the right side of that equation. Your alternative is to be on the other side and simply nip at the coattails of the elite class. Which side would you rather be on? I think we're up to number five. Number five reason to give up on property investing is, what if the government turns off the immigration tap? Then Australia will stagnate, because in Australia, births minus deaths are only 100,000 every single year. So the population basically stagnates if we don't have immigration. Therefore, the housing market will stagnate. That is the argument. My perspective on that is twofold. One is that the immigrants who have come in the last 3, 4, 5 years, actually many of them, most of them, aren't actually demanding to buy houses right now. Immigrants can't afford to buy a house as soon as they come. They typically take 3 to 7 years to find their bearings, find their feet, grow their income, find stability, and then they buy houses. So for those immigrants who have recently come the last few years, that demand is like a tsunami that's about to come in the next few years. It actually hasn't come yet. That is the truth. And the second thing is if we turn off the immigration tap, and I'm all for moderation in immigration, okay? I'm not for mass immigration. That's not me. But if they fully turn off the tap, then the Australian economy goes into a recession because the RBA has already modeled that out. The government's Treasury Department has modeled that out. The only reason we're not in a recession right now, even though we're in a per capita recession, the only reason we're not in a real recession, let's say, in the last 2 years is because of immigration. Those immigrants come, they bring money, they spend, that stimulates the economy, therefore economic growth accelerates. If that doesn't occur, then right now we're in pretty terrible, swampy, murky, dirty waters, economically speaking. So that would be political suicide for any government who decides to do that. Number 6 reason why you should give up on property investing. One person said it's just so hard to buy these days. Like, I've been trying to put offers in the Adelaide market, which by the way has the tightest rental demand at the moment, just 0.8% vacancy. I've been trying to put it on Perth. Perth seems to be going up in most suburbs at $10,000, $15,000 a month. Been trying to put offers in Brisbane, other places. I've had 10, 20, 30, 40 agents reject me. When I go on real estate or domain, everything is under offer. Real estate agents don't call me back. It's just too hard. That is why you should give up. My perspective, that is a reason you shouldn't give up, because that means that there's so much demand, so much flurry of activity, so little stock, so little listings on the market that prices are going up. So if something is hard, does that mean you should give up, or does that mean that it's hard for a reason? If most people can't achieve it, that means only a few can, and it's those few that are really making money, becoming financially independent. So do you give up because it's hard, or do you dig your heels in even more and say to yourself, I want to be part of that top 10% who actually make it? Because it's always been like this. If property investing was easy, then everyone would be financially free with 10, 15 houses or 5 houses. Everyone would be driving fancy cars, but they don't. There's only a certain section of society that does that, and it's those that were willing to work hard, take the failure, and use it as a stepping stone to actually get into the market as many times as possible. Another reason to give up on Australian property, I think we're up number 6 or 7, is places like Dubai are booming. Why not go there? Well, I don't know so much about Dubai real estate, but I do know that just after the global financial crisis, it crashed about 50%. Now, will that happen again after this huge bubble that's been going on since year 2000 in Dubai with Russian oligarchy money coming in? There was a record number of yachts being bought in and around the UAE post-COVID because people were getting their money out of Russia, Russians and others from Eastern Europe because of political tensions was moving to safe havens, low tax zones where they won't be sanctioned, their assets won't be frozen. All this caused a surge in Dubai real estate, and it's still surging. So shiny object syndrome, people always want to go to where it's the shiniest, right? But consider this, when Dubai real estate crashes, it really crashes. When Australian property crashes, like during the GFC, it's not even a crash. It fell by 8%, and despite nationally that being the average, some places carried on going up. So there's a different economic stability story, a political stability story, a lifestyle story. People always want to come to Australia. To Dubai, look, it may be the new Australia in terms of where people want to migrate to. I don't know. It's definitely not a low risk move. And of course, there's a lot of tax considerations, unless you give up your Australian passport and move there for good. Number 7, why you should give up on property investing. Australia's private debt is now over 120% of GDP, one of the highest in the world. With AI disruption threatening jobs and productivity lagging, a rise in unemployment could hit property demand hard. If that happens, Australia may face a correction similar to New Zealand and Canada unless income starts growing. Such an informed and intelligent comment as to why you should give up Australian property investing. But here's a different perspective. Yes, Australian debt to GDP is high, one of the highest in the world, but actually Australian income to GDP is also one of the highest in the world. So you have to look at both sides of the ledger, right? Yes, people have a lot of debt, but they also have more income compared to almost every peer out there to compensate. That's how they've got the debt. That's how the banks have lent them that debt in the first place. Never forget on the total value of residential real estate in Australia, which is 12.1 trillion according to the RBA, there is now only 19% debt. Yes, less than 20% debt on the cumulative total value of Australian residential real estate. The second part of that give up story was, could AI disrupt Australia? Yes, it totally could disrupt Australia. Number 8 reason why you should give up is gold. Gold has done so well. It's a safe haven when there's political turmoil globally, geopolitical uncertainty, economic. People go to gold because it actually has intrinsic value, unlike the dollar. Now, the thing is with gold, it doesn't pay a dividend, one thing, so you can't retire off gold unless you start selling it off. And then if you've sold all of it off because you didn't have enough, what are you going to live off? That's one thing with gold. And the other thing is, just like the NASDAQ and the Dow Jones story, it's grown so much. Do we really think it can go up another 30-40% in the next few years? Just like if you buy well, your investment property in Australia will do. In fact, it will achieve that in less than 18 months, bought with data and a proven system. Do we think gold can do that? Maybe your thesis is that it can. But once again, to keep up with Australian property returns that we're experiencing right now, you have to leverage that gold buy up to around 70 to 80%. Are you comfortable doing that? People are comfortable doing that en masse in Australian real estate. But in gold, I want to ask you, are you comfortable leveraging up to 70, 80%? If so, then you can match or beat Australian real estate returns. But remember, there's no annuity or dividends coming from gold. Number 9 reason to give up on property investment is that now it's way more unaffordable to actually be able to buy a property. Where am I going to buy if I only have $70,000 in the bank or equity? Where can I find something for $350,000, $450,000, $500,000? Definitely not in Perth, definitely not in Brisbane, definitely not in Adelaide, definitely not in Sydney, definitely not in Melbourne. So where am I going to buy? Like, there's no options for me. I don't have enough money. My perspective on that is look at regional. Regional has outperformed capital cities over the last 5 years, and that is not just a COVID phenomenon. Remember, the work from home story has largely been retraced, and yet regionals continue to outperform because people genuinely demand houses there. If you look at regional Australia going out 50 years in history, it's performed just as well as capital cities. In fact, a place like Launceston has beaten the relative growth of Sydney housing in the last 30 years. So what does that tell you? Regional does not equal rural. Regional does not mean a small little town with 10 shops which could bust anytime and no one really knows what's going on. Regional does not mean no renters want to move there. Regional does not mean no jobs. Regional does not mean low, poor income people. That is not what Australian regional means. In fact, you have regional towns in Australia with hundreds of thousands of people where you can buy under $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 and get your foot into the property ladder. In fact, for those of you who live in Sydney or Melbourne and you trying to aspire to buy your dream home and you can't afford it, to rent this, continue to rent where you are and invest in regional and let those properties multiply so that in the future you can sell a few of them and then afford your dream home. That is the only option you have to buy a PPOR in Sydney or Melbourne. So regional continues to do well. Number 10 reason to give up on property investing is, what if negative gearing's the shaft? What if the capital gains discount gets the shaft? But in short, negative gearing was removed in the past as well and bought back when it was removed. House prices actually went up. Modeling shows by the University of New South Wales and University of Sydney that if it was removed now, house prices actually would decline by about 1 or 1.2% in the first 1 or 2 years, after which they would continue rising. And that's because the Australian housing market is not determined just by investors. Investors only make up on average long-term 30% of demand. Most of it is owner occupiers, and that ship continues to sail. That ship continues to steam ahead. Now, capital gains tax discount, if they remove that, that just means a whole lot of investors wouldn't sell their properties anymore. They'd just take equity out and buy more, because if they sell, they're heavily taxed for that. They're penalized for that. So that means less listings, less properties for sale. Demand stays constant, at least from owner occupiers, and house prices go up. I've done more detailed rationale episodes on that. Check them out. Number 11, why you should give up on Australian property investing is if you have enough. If you've got enough properties and you have a clear pathway where, okay, my 3 properties, my 6 properties, my 9 properties, whatever it is, by the time I'm hit 50, 55, 60, or heck, if you're you're super ambitious, 45, 40, by the time I hit that, these properties with my exit strategy will produce me a $60,000 net passive income, 100,000 net passive income, 150,000 net passive income, 200,000 net passive income. And I don't need more. Like, I don't want to be greedy. I just want to live life on my terms, do things that I love with the people I love when I want to do them. If that is your pathway and you've got enough to get to that goal in X years' time, then just give up on property investing. You don't need more. You have enough. And for you guys out there that are in that position, Australian real estate investing has allowed you to buy financial happiness. I want everyone to be able to buy financial happiness because it's something that can be bought. Investing allows you to achieve that. Please consider doing that. It's worked for me. It's worked for so many of my clients. It's worked for people for decades past in Australia, even before I was teaching anything, right? It genuinely works. Consider it. Share this episode for people who don't believe this because they have these misconceptions, and also share this with people who might have ideas that I haven't covered, why they want to give up on property. My name's PK. Hit the subscribe button, share it, give it a like, and join my Facebook group where we have these discussions. Australian Property Mastery with PK. I'll leave the link below. There's 70,000 people there. Thanks very much, guys. Catch you later.